Welcome to Women at Halftime podcast, but not just for women, for you men too. If you're at mid-career or the halftime of life, our inspirational topics are not only fun, but also meant to help you maximize and write your next chapter. Right here with me, Deborah Johnson. Well, hello, this is Deborah Johnson with the Women at Halftime podcast. Today's subject, trends in society reflected in music. And I chose to approach this. It was just an interesting subject, first of all, and music has been my career for a number of years. I've expanded it, of course, into other areas. So I thought it was a very interesting subject to approach. And as this comes out, I want to make sure that you know I have a new book out as well, Stop Circling and Exiting Your and Getting Off of Your Endless Roundabouts. Make sure that you connect with me, that you get on our newsletter, goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter, and you'll get information about that. Look at my websites, goalsforyourlife.com, Deborah Johnson speaker.com, or even djworksmusic.com. You'll be able to get the information about that new book. It's wonderful, and you should be able to either pre-order it or order it right now directly with that link. So I hope you enjoy today's subject, and we will dive right in now. Well, as we talk about top trends in news, in business and finances, they're all popular topics. But as art reflects life and vice versa, trends in society are often reflected in music. And this is, of course, as I shared just a moment ago, this has been my field for a number of years. And I thought it would be interesting to draw some principles from musical styles through the decades, as well as trends in society. And it's interesting to turn back the pages of our history to reveal some of the main songs of each decade that reflect thoughts, ideology, and even market trends. We can see the political climate, rebellion, and rights and new ideas. They were all reflected in the style and the lyrics and in the culture. And this in turn affected business. And I hope to at least stimulate your thoughts to do your own research in this area, whether or not you are in business. Now, love and heartbreak tended to run through every single decade, as those themes are timeless. And for those of us who are songwriters, we like to write about those. But starting with the 1950s, we will also look at some of the artists and the styles that reflected the times and the culture. And some of the songs were just a response of the time period, but others they looked to push the envelope of thoughts and ideas. And the few songs listed in this podcast or in this article, they might not have all won top awards, but they all made some sort of an impact. So we're going to look first at the decade of the 1950s. World War II had just ended in 1945, and the memory of war was really fresh for those who had fought hard to rid our world of a crazed German leader. And it was also fresh for those who had seen so many of their loved ones go to war and not coming home. And also with that sickening information about the internment of the Jewish population. So songs like At the Hop, All I Have to Do Is Dream by the Everly Brothers, and a character like Fonzie and Happy Days at this period of time, it focuses on a simpler life. Love was simple. It was fun and something to celebrate. And our country was ready for a break, but it didn't last long. We go to the decade of the 1960s. And by late 1963, there were more than 16,000 Americans on the ground advising South Vietnamese troops in Vietnam. 1964 and 1965 brought an escalation of the war, and an anti-war movement mobilized Americans in vast numbers. And many young men that were drafted, they never came home. And the song, like Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival, it proclaimed the message of hypocritical flag wavers who sent others off to war. Blowin' in the Wind by Bob Dylan, it was performed in protest. And Elvis even had a protest song with If I Can Dream. So we can see the reflection of the times. Also, the 1960s brought harmonic sophistication. The Beach Boys, they started with this simple surf songs and basic harmonies, but their good vibrations in 1966, it burst on the scene with its harmonic expansion led by Brian Wilson. Topping the Beach Boys' popularity were the Beatles. And after creating simple love songs and harmonies with songs like Love Me Do as their first hit, they became so popular and so rich that they were able to expand their music and risks harmonically with songs that spoke, even of a drug culture, like Yellow Submarine, which was often interpreted as a reflection of social and political injustices. Light My Fire, written and performed by The Doors, is interpreted mostly as romantic, but many of the songs written during this time period reference drugs and other events of the time. Aretha Franklin's version of the song, Respect, it turned from that original plea of love to a running anthem for the feminist and civil rights movements. Respect. Let's move to the decade of the 1970s. The 1970s was a time of long hair to the waist, parted down the middle, at least for many of us women, and communal living and songwriting and war and protest for the end of war. I wasn't involved in that, but that was the time. People were tired of losing their sons in the Vietnam War, which it felt useless. Large concerts started taking off with the communal feel of the music industry. Woodstock in late 1969 drew a huge crowd and signified the popularity of large concerts with a large artist lineup. Drugs were rampant with marijuana and very, very little security. Jimi Hendrix, Joe Cocker, and Creedence Clearwater Revival, they were some of the first performers at that venue at Woodstock. The song Imagine by John Lennon states a utopia where all the people live in life in peace. People are still talking about peace. The Beatles song, Let It Be, it does urge us to just let go, relax, and leave worry behind. But it also reaches to all the broken-hearted people in the world, people who hate each other or are at war. That message still rings true today. Carole King and James Taylor, they were some of the most prolific singer-songwriters from the late 1960s into the 70s and beyond. Their songs still stand as some of my top favorites. And many of the top songwriters at this time, they wrote in collaboration. And they became known as troubadours. Elton John's critical success was at its peak in the 1970s as a pianist vocalist and performing with those wild glasses and clothes and coming out of and who he was. Let's move to the decade of the 1980s. 1980s was a time for big hair, perms, and women starting to emerge even more as their own artists. And it was a time for electronic sounds and repetitive beats. Madonna's Like a Virgin topped the Billboard singles chart for 6 weeks in 1984 as a danceable love song. The song and the video, well, they were thought to be radical at the time, especially the title, but it seems mild today. It makes us wonder if any of the radical messages of today will ever feel normal. Madonna is a good example of an artist who has had a very long career because she consistently reinvented herself and her style. And this is a principle that is even more important today. Michael Jackson. Oh, wow. One of the biggest pop artists of the 1980s with his song Thriller. And Cyndi Lauper burst on the scene with spiked hair and the feminist anthem, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Whitney Houston. She combined soul with pop as a woman of color who broke through to the mainstream. It was huge. She was also the first woman of color to be featured on the cover of 17 magazine in the early 1980s. So many things happened during that decade. Then we move on to the decade of the 1990s. And with the entrance of Smells Like Teen Spirit by Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, grunge entered the mainstream, which spoke of apathy and nonconformist attitude. And there was a concern for social issues, particularly among young people. Tolerance of differences and the support of women were common themes. The style was loud and even violent. Even though this type of music wasn't considered mainstream at first, the effect of a slacker and a slouch look and mohawk hair, it picked up momentum in the commercial market. Hip hop and rap with boy bands and Black artists, they emerged center stage. Snoop Dogg, Lauryn Hill, TLC, and others kept pushing style and culture. And even some of us working as musicians throughout this time period, we thought this style would just die out, but it only escalated into the 2000s. So let's move into the decade of the 2000s, and this will be the last one we really cover. And what did die down in the 2000s was pure grunge, but hip hop and rap kept escalating into the combined styles like pop punk. R&B also dominated the Billboard charts. Spice Girls, Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC, they were producing mostly those manufactured sounds by their record labels. But indie artists, they started to break through. Many of these artists were not backed by the main record labels. They wanted freedom. These independent artists took risks, and they helped to expand the style into the 2000s. And to be independent, it means you don't have the major marketing dollars of a record label. But there is more freedom. And many artists through the 2000s have chosen this route. Some have bought out their contracts and their publishing rights. With the entrance of digital music on iPods, iPads, everything else, and other devices, artist rights became even more of an issue with intellectual property. And this remains a major issue today in many areas of business. The digital revolution changed so much for many creators, including authors, speakers, inventors, and of course, composers, all of those songwriters and artists. Well, what can we learn from this, from some of these principles? Well, even there is so much music that we can cover. I want to focus on what we can learn from trends in society reflected in the music. And hopefully you'll keep doing your own research. Music is even more fluid than business. It reflects and interacts with trends. And as entrepreneurs, we look at trends, but to only follow trends would leave us as a one-hit wonder. For a sustainable future, like most of the artists listed in this post, in this podcast, quality counts, and the discipline to keep going and to keep writing counts. There are so many trends in society that using music that we could approach. But looking at some of the main principles should help us evaluate where we are now and looking to the future. Here are some takeaway principles I hope you can apply. Number one, what we think will never last just might last. Never say never. Number two, always focus on quality, not just a trendy style. Very important. Three, be aware of cultural changes, but be focused on your mission. And number four, society will usually vote with their dollars and their attention on a trend. Well, look for those. If you are at mid-career or the halftime of life, I really encourage you to define your core values and your purpose. Look at the trends, but be true to your heart and your style and your abilities and your mission. I talk about this in my book, Stop Circling, especially as I wrote a whole other extra bonus chapter on core values and how important those are in defining your purpose. I hope you found value in this. It was a fun research topic for me. It was much bigger than I even imagined, and there were so many more rabbit trails I could have gone down. But I tried to focus on some of the main events that happened in each decade and that were reflected in some of the artists, in some of their style, and some of their messaging. Look at the lyrics, not just the style of music, but look at the lyrics. Look at the mannerisms. Look at the dressing, the people the way they're dressing. But I think that's important for every single decade that we looked at, and even today. But again, be true to yourself. Be true to what you stand for. I hope you really take that to heart, that you are worth it. Your skills are worth it. Your experience is worth it. I come from the arts, and in the arts, there's so much of the, who's better. There's so much of the self-promotion, but that's really true in so many fields. So I hope that you take to heart who you are and be true to you. And there's so much satisfaction in that. Make sure you connect with me, goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. I put out a podcast every single week, and I have bonus podcasts coming up. So make sure that you also follow Women at Halftime podcast. You can also reach me at deborahjohnsonspeaker.com. I do take a few live events these days, and also DJ Works Music. I love what I do, absolutely love what I do. And I love encouraging you in your journey. So I hope this has encouraged you in some way today. And I'll look forward to being with you again next time. So bye for now.
Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show, and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.